our April meeting of Insights. My name is Vicky Guittardo. I'm the GM of Strategy and Engagement for Powering Skills organisation. I'll be hosting you this morning. We've got, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4 chunky bits to get through today. So we will jump into it. Powering Skills organisation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. And this morning I come to you from Turrbal in Yagara country in Brisbane. Slide. So today we've, as I said, we've got 4 real chunky bits. A little bit, we're going to hear from Anthea first, our CEO. Trevor Gould is going to, I'll give a bit of an introduction to Trevor. If you've never met him before, I'll give a bit of an introduction to Trevor and what he's here to speak to us about today. We're going to talk to you about our productivity report that is soon to be released. Steve Hall will give a training product development update, and then Kurt, as per normal, as we have a standard spot in these Insights meeting from month to month, will be giving a policy update. And so you'll hear from Kurt today. He gets really great feedback, that policy update. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Kurt. So over to Anthea Middleton, our CEO, to give a staff update.
Hi everyone, lovely to be here. Thank you all for dialing in. Just a really quick update on how we're going as PSO. Last year we really focused on building our project and project management capability, really ensuring that we're a strong delivery team focused on evidence-based, action-oriented is what we like to say, but really focused on building a structure that could support that. This year we've refined that slightly as well and introduced the Office of the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, and we've aligned all of our enabling functions, our internal enabling functions under under the Office of the COO. So that includes our PMO, Project Management Office, our people and operations, PR, marketing and comms, and our governance and compliance now all sit under the Chief Operating Officer. I'm very delighted to announce that Vicky Guittardo, who is hosting today's session, has been promoted into that role and will commence in that position as of next week. We think this is this sets us up really for the next 3 years to continue delivering really good, innovative work. And we're really excited to be able to move into this new phase. So I'm sure you'll all join me in congratulating Vicky. And so awkwardly, back to you, Vicky Guittardo, but thank you.
Thank you.
Very well deserved.
We thought it would be very weird for me to introduce that myself and congratulate myself. So not well done me, but well done me. But anyway, let's move over to Trevor. And so a bit of an introduction. I had the pleasure of meeting Trevor when I first went on this journey of Powering Skills organisation. And I must say, Trevor provided great advice when we first were setting up as Powering Skills organisation. And it was really, encouraging to see Trevor move into his current role as Deputy Commissioner at Jobs and Skills Australia, better known as JSA, where he plays a key role in shaping national skills strategies to meet Australia's current and future workforce needs. With deep expertise in workforce development, vocational education and strategic policy, Trevor brings a strong commitment to building a future-ready, inclusive and skilled economy. Prior to joining JSA, Trevor served as the National Assistant Secretary of the Electrical Trades Union, where he championed the rights of workers and advocated for quality training and apprenticeship pathways. His career began in the electrical industry, working across power distribution, transmission, maintenance and construction, giving him first-hand insight into the importance of practical skills and lifelong learning. And I must say, from Powering Skills organisation, it's actually really been a boon for us to have this connection with JSA and Trevor's background. He's also held numerous board directorships and committee roles, providing strategic advice and skills development, worker entitlements, immigration, trade policy, and climate and clean energy initiatives. His collaborative approach has seen him work closely with government, industry, unions, and education providers to drive innovation and improve outcomes for learners and employers alike. He's a passionate advocate for equity in education, employment, and training, and his leadership continues to support JSA's mission to enhance skills mobility, workforce capability, and economic participation across Australia. So with no further ado, I'd love to introduce Trevor. Trevor, welcome, and I'm going to hand over the reins to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky, and really appreciate the warm welcome, and thanks to you and Anthea and importantly the PSO community for having me along. So I've got a little bit that I want to run through today. I'm just mindful of time. Is 20 minutes, is that about right for timing? And so what I'm hoping to do is I did address the PSO conference remotely last year. There was a little cyclone event in Brisbane, which was fairly unusual, so I couldn't travel. So hopefully you're all familiar with some of what JSA does, and I'm going to focus a little bit on what we've been doing since I last addressed you, and just touch on some of what we do. So if I could go to the next slide, thanks. And of course, those of you that are familiar with JSA would know that our first priority outcome, if you will, in our focus at JSA is fostering inclusive participation. And so in that sense, I want to join with Vicky in acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which we meet. Everyone's beaming in from all over the place, I'm sure. I'm joining you from Meanjin, Brisbane, and can confirm it is unseasonably cool at present. And I want to pay my respects to the Yagara and Turrbal people and their elders past and present. Next slide, thanks. So there's a bit going on in the national economy, I think, right now. JSA, it's probably worth noting, was created on the 1st of November 2022. So in the architecture of things, along with the JSCs, we're a little under 3.5 years old. So relatively young organisations when you think about that journey, and when you think about the amount of work that PSO and JSA have done in that time, is quite incredible. And really JSA's job is to foster that national conversation and really to create that trusted independent evidence base for policy makers, governments, decision makers, employers, unions, the skills system actors to make good informed decisions off the back of. And recently we had a 3-year statutory review. Dr. Michelle Bruniges led that review, and we received really positive feedback. There were some areas of opportunity which some we had already begun addressing, and others that we're definitely taking on board now to continue to ensure that JSA provides that trusted evidence base. We recently put out what we call our International Labour Market Update, which I think is probably instructive as to sort of the environment that we're operating in at the moment. And certainly what that identified is that global growth is weakening and certainly leaving many developing countries poorer than their pre-pandemic levels. We're obviously seeing monetary tightening globally, so higher interest rates, and uncertainty, and then uncertainty growing, geopolitical risks, conflicts, fluctuations in those oil prices, and all of that is playing out in Australia as it is globally. What we also saw, interestingly, is a global softening in labour markets and economic conditions more broadly. But despite that overall softening, demand persists, particularly for occupations in shortage in Australia, and certainly the occupations that PSO is focused on fit that category. So even though we do see that sort of softening in demand, that's not likely to translate at all to this sector. I think also what it means a little bit for our skills system, and I know lots of people sort of thinking about what all these impacts have on our skills system. I think we're going to start to see a real change in the profile in enrolments across our vocational education and training system. Less of that sort of that just general inflow of people doing whichever vet they might be particularly interested in, to a much more focused and targeted enrolment around occupational outcomes. So those vocational education and training qualifications in particular, and higher education qualifications that are very, very closely linked to employment outcomes and very much embedded with work integrated learning, such as apprenticeships and traineeships, for example. So if I can just skip, I think, 2 slides here. One more. So we've been putting out all kinds of reports, and so this is really from around September last year. So as you can see, there's quite a bit that we've put out. Each year we do our annual report, and we take that on the road, and we go to every capital city in the country. We try and do a regional location, and we try and do an online one. And so very much encourage you to get engaged in those. We'll be doing that again towards the back end of this year. And we're also really thinking a bit about what might a broader jobs and skills month in and around November, culminating in the training awards, look like. And so we're going to be very keen to talk to PSO about participating in that, and PSO stakeholders, of course. We'd love to have you engaged. We're involved in an International Students Outcomes and Pathways study, which was quite an interesting piece of research. Encourage you to have a look online. We've got a webinar which really gets into the detail on that. But I think a couple of elements in that were really important were about the disparity in outcomes for international students compared to their domestic counterparts, and some of the underpinning reasons for that. And I think also a new evidence base to understand the pathways of international students. I think for a long time, it was believed that international students came to Australia and participated in both the vet and higher education systems, and then went back home and deployed whatever they'd learnt in their home countries. And I think the last figures before we did our report were in the vicinity of 16% of international students were believed to remain in Australia and transition to a permanent migration pathway. Well, our evidence, we analysed the entire student visa cohort from around 2010-11 through to 2020, 2021. And in the early 2010s, what we saw is that cohort was much closer to 35, even 40% were transitioning eventually to permanent migration outcomes. And towards the back end of that decade, we started to see that to drop more to about 25 to 30%. And so that really sort of changes our understanding of why are international students engaging with our skills systems, and are our skills systems in fact making them employment ready, given the much higher volumes who were coming to and then staying in Australia. We've also released our Vocational National Data Asset Update. I went through this quite a bit at the conference last year, but definitely encourage you to take a look at this resource. It really speaks volumes about the power of the vocational education and training system, and particularly for the qualifications that PSO has custody of. These are incredibly powerful qualifications for delivering social mobility and equity and uplift for Australians. And so we updated that report in December, and we also indicated some new data on partial completions I'll talk to shortly. We've released the First Nations Vet Workforce research paper talking about the participation of First Nations people in and around the vet workforce, and some promising practice design principles around how vocational education and training providers can make their workplaces more inclusive, and the broader benefits to the economy of doing that. And just recently, we've put out a couple of papers on employment and disability. We're obviously waiting for the National Disability Data Asset to be stood up so that we can get a much deeper understanding of people with disability and their intersection with the labour market and skills system. But so we drew on some different data or evidence bases in the interim while we wait to get access to that NDDA. And we've put out 2 papers on employment and disability, which I think are an interesting contribution that people might want to take a look at. And very recently, we released our Training Occupations Pathways product, which is on our website, really exploring and using some really advanced mapping methodologies to map out occupations to qualifications and qualifications to occupations. We're seeking feedback on that right now from our public launch. We received a lot of feedback from PSO. Thank you so much, Anthea, to your teams for helping us with that. There is some further refining to do, and of course, ours is a national product, and we know that there is always state and territory nuance and regulatory settings. So very keen to get people's feedback on that. And 17 minutes ago, we released the first in a series of papers on lifelong learning. So if that's an area of interest for you, jump on our website and take a look. I think it'll be an important series of contributions. And probably the last one I'll touch on is a bit later this year, we're going to have the release of a project that we've done on apprenticeships and traineeships. And we're really going to be looking at three things. One is, what do apprentices and trainees value from a support, from a non-financial support perspective around what makes apprenticeships and traineeships successful. Secondly, we're going to be exploring a bit about culturally and linguistically diverse cohorts who have been historically underrepresented in apprenticeships and traineeship systems, and building an evidence base about understanding that, given Australia's declining birth rates and our migration patterns, etc. It's another one of those stories that if we are excluding a portion of the population from industry sectors, then is it any wonder that we have occupational shortages? So I think that'll be an important contribution. And the last element of that paper, we are very much using some of our integrated data assets to understand who employs apprentices and trainees and how has that changed over time. So I imagine that'll be pretty topical given the discussions in the media right now. We just skip to the next slide, thanks. There's a QR code here if you want to rip the phones out and take a look at this report, but this is our last year's jobs and skills report, and very much we've been realigning our focus on some of these big challenges in Australia right now, which is productivity, participation and skills. And so very much this report really digs into the detail on each of those areas. So very much encourage people to take a look at it. Productivity's really one of those top order discussion points right now, and as I'm sure many of you know, productivity is a range of matters. A major contributor to productivity is managerial capability and skills. And interestingly, I engaged with the Australian Institute of Management recently, who sort of told me about this sort of 10-year or decadal shift of reduction in training in that sort of that supervisory up to C-suite level of managerial skills. So we're doing some work around business investment and training at JSA now. Productivity is also about job design and role clarity, so that's always important. It's also about capital investment and expansion, and investing, of course, in workers' skills so that they can take full use of that capital investment and capital expansion. So really important, and we're doing a range of work in this space throughout this year. If we jump to the next slide, I mentioned earlier talking about our Vanda asset and partial completions. And so the chart that you're looking at here, the green dots, what they tell you is the median income uplift and the income support exit rate for people that enrolled in a full vet qualification in Australia. So that's across the entire vet sector, any qualification that they completed. And what we did is, in a de-identified way, we tracked them through from 1 year pre-enrollment through to 1 year post-enrollment to understand what is vet doing as far as social mobility, as far as helping workers realise their full potential. And so what those green dots tell you is a really powerful story about median income uplift. So this is from Cert 1 through to advanced diploma. So this is a really broad set where we look at these median income uplifts. If you look at the sectors that PSO looks after, the numbers are huge, much, much bigger than this. But interestingly also, what we see is across all priority cohorts that vet plays a powerful story. Now, The new insight that we have released in that report at the back end of last year, and we're doing a further release of more details on this shortly, is these purple graphs that you see. And the purple graphs tell you what happens when someone partially completes. So this is a person who enrolled in a vet qualification, completed at least 1 unit of competency, did not complete, and did not re-enroll into further study for at least 2 years. And what we can see is we still see national median income uplift of somewhere in the vicinity of $7,500. And we still see people that were on income support exiting at huge rates, at nearly 30% of people that were on income support prior to enrolling in a course but not completing it, exiting income support. That's a really powerful story if you're wanting to advocate. And if you dig into some of this data, you'll see that some of these rates are much, much higher across the electrotechnology, gas generation sectors. So really, really important data. Next slide, please. We're also getting close to doing or completing the first part of our vet blueprint actions, and both JSA and the JSEs had a range of actions on this, and very, very appreciative of PSO, who have played a bit of a coordinating role for us across the JSEs in engaging with JSA's part of this work. And so in coming weeks, well, at the end of this week, indeed, we're having a meeting with the cross JSEs, and then with a tripartite project advisory group soon after that, where we're hoping to release a range of draft functional profiles for the sector and some potential early case studies to build an exemplar guide about occupational mapping. We're hoping to test a data dashboard about the vet workforce so that we understand who is in the vet workforce and where. And we've obviously been engaged in and around this research program, including the release of the First Nations vet workforce that I talked about, as well as you can see on the next slide. If we just jump to that one, we've identified a range of research priorities across vet that are really, really important. And of course, we heard very strongly that we wanted that vet research to be researched by vet rather than higher ed, and to very much be practitioner-led. So there's a range of activities occurring in this space around research, including a piece of work JSA is doing in and around understanding casualisation within the vet sector. And again, we're hoping for that output to be produced a bit later this year. Just mindful of time, so I'll skip forward. I mentioned employment and disability. And so we used our recruitment experience as an outlook survey that JSA does. We survey about 1,000 employers a month to gain some data, and we put a module in there around disability. And we also grabbed some of the existing data sets out there with all of their limitations to put out these 2 reports. And I think really, really interesting was that around 1 in 6 Australians aged 15 to 64 live with disability, and most are employed, 56.1%. With 2 in 5 of those people employed part-time. But I think a really powerful stat here that we should all be thinking about is that there are over 260,000 people aged 15 to 64 with disability, approximately 10% of that disability cohort, who are not employed, but who are potentially job ready. So they indicated that they're ready, keen to, looking for work, but have not been able to secure work. And so I think thinking about how we make disability inclusive workplaces is an incredibly important ingredient to helping start solve those shortage challenges. And I think when you look on that previous couple of slides around the power of vet and what vet delivers for people with disability on median income uplift, on exiting income support, and in other stats around employability, vet's a really powerful enabler for disability. We probably need a range of things around what government support might look like, but also what might employers leaning into this space and building employers' confidence to offer people with disability employment. Next slide. The next piece really is this challenge around young people, and particularly in regional Australia, we've got this challenge around high youth unemployment rates. So how do we engage young people into work? And then we've got this challenged 12.4% nationally of youth aged 18 to 24. The acronym is NEET, not in employment, educational training, neither working or studying in 2021. So completely disengaged from the labour market and education systems. And we really need to get them back. If you go to regional Australia more broadly, that's 15.5%. And if you look at particular regions within Australia, you'll see that that number can be even higher again. And so we really need to think about how we are engaging with this generation. What are the structural issues that are going on? And again, I think the story around apprenticeships and traineeships is a really powerful one for pathways for people who don't automatically fit into traditional higher ed pathways or even some of the vet pathways, that people that are more interested in work integrated learning. So how do we increase those opportunities? Again, a massive opportunity, massive challenge, but a massive opportunity for addressing skills shortages. The last two slides I just wanted to touch on briefly. I know that PSO has been doing a power of work in and around understanding foundation skills as a really important integral part of the apprenticeship and traineeship system. A couple of pieces of work JSA are doing in this space to help build the evidence base. Number one, interestingly, Australia has no single common agreed definition for digital literacy. And so we've been tasked by government to develop that definition. And very recently, I was lucky enough to be head of mission to lead a delegation to the APEC Human Resources Development Working Group in Singapore, where we convened a whole range of APEC economies from around the world: Peru, Singapore, Chile, Taiwan, Thailand, Papua New Guinea, a whole range of folk into a room to have this conversation about what are APEC economies doing around digital literacy, who has digital literacy definitions, what do they mean, what are the gaps, what are the big challenges. And so there will be a paper coming out on that a little bit later in May, I anticipate, which will talk about what that group discussed, what they found, some of their observations. And around the middle of this year, JSA will be providing some advice around what a national digital literacy definition might look like. Of course, I think the two most common ones people are familiar with is the DLSF, which is in a draft, the Digital Literacy Framework, which is in a draft, and increasingly the European Convention DigiComp. Both of them have strengths and challenges, but that's an area that we're focused on. Just getting to the last slide, we've also been doing a whole heap of work in around foundation skills. We put out a administrative data report last year in October. If that's an area you're interested in around foundation skills, take a look. I mentioned the digital skills, but an important contribution, which some elements high level will be coming out earlier this year, and then others will be a more comprehensive report back end of this year, early next year. But we literally surveyed over 9,000 Australians across regional and metropolitan areas of Australia, and surveyed them around literacy and numeracy. This was off the back of several governments ago now. There was a decision made for Australia not to participate in PIAC, the Program of International Assessment of Adult Competencies. And so we understood that was going to be a very big gap in Australia's understanding of foundation skills across the nation. So we did that survey back end of last year. We've also done a qualitative survey with a selection of the people that participate in that survey. And our teams are currently crunching all of that data now, and we're hoping for some early high-level insights into what's going on with Australia's foundation skills levels. Like I said, out a bit later today, and then a full comprehensive report probably early next year. And then lastly, one of the things that no country does in the PIAC rounds is actually measure the foundation skill levels of First Nations populations. And so we have an all First Nations team at JSA who've been working on a feasibility study to understand what would be involved in measuring those foundation skills in remote communities in Australia. And our teams are out in the field now visiting a whole range of remote communities to do this feasibility study. So I think that'll be a really important contribution, again, out later on this year. So look, last slide, that was a really, really quick walk through a whole range of, I suppose this is an invitation to connect. But I just want to thank you all for your deep engagement and commitment to the sector as always. I encourage you to use our products in your advocacy for your sector. Keep engaging with us because your engagement with our work makes our work much, much stronger. So thanks so much, Anthea, Vicky and PSO for having me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Trevor. And there's a couple of questions. Now, Luke Verdon has a statement rather than a question, but he refers to the latest changes to NDIS and it's perhaps going to create further uncertainty for employers in supporting employment of staff with disabilities. So that's more of a statement. And I'm sure that JSA has been talking about that. It's kind of the current hot topic across Australia. But there is a question from David Moody. So do you think the federal government's ESG, just for reference, everyone, ESG stands for environmental, social and governance legislation, will have a positive impact on employment opportunities for people with disability over time? Also, does your reporting distinguish between supported and open employment data?
So I think any entity, whether it's government or private industry, I think any large employers in particular, government in particular, any move to ensure that you've got strong procurement frameworks that flow through the supply chain are important. Getting the balance right, making sure that there are evidence-based targets associated with that, of course, is incredibly important, and working with industry to establish that. But absolutely, we have seen there is overwhelming evidence that where those sorts of frameworks are well constructed and well implemented, then we see positive benefits. On your second half of your question, so JSA is in the process of becoming accredited, if you will, to access the National Disability Data Asset. Currently, most of our work, well, all of our work as it pertains to disability, relies very much on some very poor definitions that have been in place up until now. So we don't, I would say that we don't necessarily have a great deal in that distinction that you've asked for, but we are absolutely committed. We're going to be creating a disability advisory panel at JSA who will help us in that sense of co-design, focus how we choose what we're going to explore, and make sure we engage with that group about how we represent what we find. And so watch this space. We're definitely committed to continuous improvement.
Thanks, Trevor. I note that, you mentioned earlier 7.5 million followers. That's huge. And, for anyone who, I've popped the website in the chat for anyone who is not familiar with the products that JSA produce. They have a wonderful atlas in there, which is interactive for people to use. I also note, the interesting stuff that you're doing around language and literacy really aligns well with Powering Skills organisation. And for people on this call, we've got a report that will be released within the next month or two on language literacy and numeracy, which really looks at from year 9 at school into the occupations that PSO is familiar with. And it really maps the level of, as an emphasis on the level of mathematics required to get people through. And one of the big reasons why young people drop out of the Cert 3 in electrotechnology in first and second years. So look out for that. As always, Trevor, it's really interesting hearing your feedback. I encourage everyone to go to the website, and thank you for your time today. So next, and we will take, Taha, I see that you have a question there. We'll take that and forward it to Trevor, and we'll see if we can get back to you. So ask Kai if you could just take note of that. So let's move right along to productivity and skills, and I'm going to hand over to our CEO, Anthea Middleton, to talk about a report that is coming up for us.
Thanks, Vicky. And thanks, Trevor. What an amazing volume of work you've JSA have achieved in such a short time period, and really excellent quality as well. So thanks, Trevor. That's excellent. I'll kick in. So I'm pleased today to talk about an upcoming report that we have written on skills and productivity in the energy sector. It is a really complex topic, and today is just a 15-minute preview of the key highlights ahead of that full release. I'd like to very much acknowledge the great work of the Workforce Planning and Research team, in particular Nathan St. John, who led the research and writing. Nathan is on the call today and is on hand to answer questions in the chat as we go. So please, if you have a question, either use the Q&A live or just the main chat. We'll respond to both. We did this research because productivity is falling at the fastest rate that we've seen in 60 years, and certainly faster than most OECD countries. It's now a key national focus, including a priority in the upcoming May budget. And there's a really clear lens on clean energy and skills. That said, there's really limited evidence on how skills and productivity interact in practice, particularly in the energy sector, despite the central role that we play in national priorities. So the paper aims to really start to fill the gap by benchmarking what we know now and then applying it to what's emerging, which is aimed at strengthening the evidence base for planning and decision making, rather than setting specific policy recommendations. We were also pleased to see similar work, and I know Trevor mentioned it, that the JSA team produced last year, and it really clearly aligns with our direction in understanding these impacts as well. So, as an example, PSO has used the findings from this work already in submissions to the Productivity Commission, and including on strengthening incentives and frameworks for training specifically. At the heart of our exploration on productivity for the energy sector is a guiding principle, and that is any opportunity for change to increase productivity must hold safety of both the worker and the public, well-being and quality as their highest priorities. Productivity cannot and should not be an open door that leads to the erosion of safety, the erosion of quality, or the exploitation of workers. So the goal is dual, with both aspects being equally important. The betterment of not only our economy and our industries, but also the living standards and the work standards of Australians, and not just for the energy sector, for all sectors. So I'll kick into some of the key highlights of the report. The first highlight really starts to show the big picture trends, which is productivity growth and skill shortages across the Australian economy. The graph on the left from the Productivity Commission really reflects what's been driving much of the national conversation and agenda. So the red dotted line through the middle is the current 59-year average. We've rounded that up to 60. So it's clearly in decline, and over the past decade, it has slowed to the lowest levels that we've seen in 60 years. There's many reasons that contribute to that, which are explored more deeply in the paper. We'll focus specifically on skills and the impact that has today. So this type of graph is keeping a lot of economists and leaders up at night. But it matters for all of us because productivity growth is what has historically driven wage growth and living standards. The second graph is a simple one on the right-hand side, and it tells a really important story. It tracks national skills shortage severity over the past 20 years, and this is measured by job vacancies as a share of total jobs. What it shows is skill shortages are worse than in earlier periods. COVID obviously created a sharp spike, and whilst conditions have somewhat eased since, they remain relatively elevated and structurally high. Whilst it's not shown in the chart, there is a broad consensus that there is now the most severe skill shortage that we've seen in the last 60 years. We think these two things are very clearly linked, and it's not complex, but it makes a very clear point, and it's somewhat intuitive. When we combine the two graphs, productivity growth decade by decade, which is the green bars, and the proportion of vacant jobs, which are the coral graphs or orange, depending on what your eyes see, the pattern's really clear. The largest productivity decline in recent years is linked to the largest skill shortages in memory. So we think that these two things are very clearly linked. By bringing the data together, it helps show what might have been missing, or we think is missing, from the national conversation, and that is that skills are a key driver to realising productivity growth. It's important to be clear, we know that skills is only one driver of productivity, and there are many others, like streamlined regulatory and investment frameworks and technology integration. But it is very easy to see how workforce constraints flow through the system and create a real bottleneck for growth, affecting those productivity aspects. So, for example, without skilled planners and engineers, even strong approvals and investment processes don't translate into delivery because the planning stages aren't complete. Without skilled operators and technicians, new technologies can't be properly implemented or maintained, limiting the gains that we get from automation and digital investments. Without electricians and HVAC technicians to build new energy infrastructure, projects like data centres, which are deeply reliant on energy, will be delayed. So we've really started to turn intuition about skills and productivity into useful intersections between skills, availability of skilled labour, and productivity. We can go to the next slide. So the next thing we looked at was specifically for the energy sector, so productivity levels, skill shortages, and the relationship between them. So starting with productivity, we don't have a reliable standalone data for the energy sector. That's not how ABS collects the data. So we've used larger proxy industries that contain the energy workforce, like utilities and construction. And we talk about a number of electrical trades. There are 6 key trades that we really believe are critical to achieving the current net zero targets, both in new construction of renewable energy sources, but also the electrification and energy efficiency measures that will need to be undertaken. And so we look at these broader industries because they do provide a reliable representation of where those trades sit. And this is detailed for those of you who want to understand it more deeply in the paper. But what we found was very clear. Productivity in the energy sector, as measured through these industries, is at the bottom of the table in Australia. So the chart compares productivity growth across major industries over the last 20 years. Utilities has gone backwards over time, and construction is among the weakest performers in our economy. During the research process, we found that productivity in these industries is generally harder to lift than other parts of the economy due to factors like regulation. So we do expect some slower growth. However, we also looked at international comparisons which show Australia's energy-related performance has been slipping in the global rankings, and this suggests that there's a number of factors at play which could include skill shortages, and we firmly believe that it does. Trying desperately not to lose my voice this week. We've got the whole team flying into Australia tomorrow for our April all-in, so if we look at skill shortages in the energy sector, we've found really quickly that the skill shortages here are among the most severe in the economy. As with the productivity, the data isn't perfect, and the box on the right-hand side outlines that. So we worked with the best available indicators and then validated that approach. We couldn't measure directly energy sector skill shortages, so we used trades and technicians as a proxy. Overall, this gives us confidence in using trade workforce shortages as a strong reflection of energy sector pressures. And the findings are really clear. Trade shortages and by extension, energy sector shortages are at the top of the table across the economy. And these are among the most intense pressures that we see. The chart shows the percentage of employers reporting recruitment difficulties by occupational group in Australia, and trades remain the hardest to source, so the pressure is not easing. We look at this in more detail in the paper as what, and explore why these shortages have become so severe, which is primarily growing demand from the clean energy transition and meeting the long-running shortages in trades and occupations across every state and territory. So we also found that another important factor here in the energy sector, particularly hard, which contributes to the shortage, again, focusing on utilities and construction, post-trade training has declined more sharply here than in any other industry. Between 2007 and 2022, training participation rate in the utilities sector has fallen by 62%, which is at the top of any sector measured. Similarly, construction, which is a very large employer of energy trades, has fallen by 32%. Tradespeople, particularly electricians, are also less likely to undertake ongoing upskilling compared to other occupations. And this can result in a continuing cycle of increased pressure on our already constrained workforce and industries, and is a result of those two things as well, but leads to further declining training rates and therefore declining productivity. And again, that puts increased pressure on our workforce and our employers. So the cycle is just continuing. When we talk about training, we aren't just talking about the technical trade base. It could be for AI-driven scheduling or invoicing tools. It could be for more effective apprentice supervision. All of these can have a really large impact on the productivity of businesses and their workforce. Workplaces who don't invest in training are also often the slowest to adopt new technologies that could improve safety and performance. Within this troubling cycle too is where we start to see increased incidents of risk-taking behaviours and negative safety and wellbeing implications on the workforce. Again, further highlighting the critical role of upskilling for our sector and the impact that can have on productivity. Looking to the future, many of these factors show little signs of resolving on their own. And emerging activity like the National Housing Accord, our net zero targets, even the war in Iran, are likely to continue to worsen the factors that we've already discussed. So intervention, we believe, is the exciting part of this research. It's an opportunity to drive change where we can intervene and make a difference with these factors. Because the dynamic between productivity, access to skilled labour, and the upskilling of our established and emerging workforce exposes a massive opportunity. So we stand at the bottom end of many of these productivity factors, which could be argued is an unenviable place to be, but the opportunity to improve and set a cascading chain of events to significantly positively impact these factors and lessen the pressure on our workforce to increase safety, profits, wages, standards of living is huge. So to summarise this session and the key findings, firstly, skills development can lift the productivity curve. We know that skills development isn't only just good practice, it can be a really impactful way to improve the productivity in our sector. Secondly, policy, system reform and investment in skills and workforce are substantial levers for improving the sector's productivity. And finally, unaddressed skill shortages really will contribute to further productivity decline, and we must intervene to take this opportunity for everything that it offers. Long-term skills development can lift the productivity curve and alleviate our workforce shortages. And within the energy sector and our critical occupations, there is a significantly increased opportunity compared to other sectors. And really what that means is we can deeply contribute to improving productivity for all of Australia. We're doing a number of things in this space. Powering Skills organisation is already looking at the importance and the impacts of a national CPD framework for electrical trades and how that relates especially to national licensing of electrical trades. We are modernising energy training packages, developing training packages that more closely mirror industry needs, like the work we're currently doing on the UEE electrotechnology training package that will directly impact the suitability of newer workers and their productivity. We're also developing new training products like the V2X or Vehicle to Everything, which will provide a more consistent and efficient way to upskill workers who will require knowledge in niche areas, again, lifting the productivity of those workers. We continue to support the vet sector through the work like our vet workforce blueprint and training product projects that implement and contribute to lifting the capacity and capability of the vet sector, again, driving increased accessibility and efficiency of training. We continue to conduct engagement research and policy work, and we'll continue to identify areas of opportunity for systemic change and identified and validated through our stakeholders, yourselves, backed by evidence and advocated by PSO to government and industry. All of these and a range of other PSO projects that we are currently undertaking will continue to contribute to productivity growth for our sector. So please keep this in mind as we tackle our enduring challenges, because a little momentum of some of these areas could trigger the cascade of progress that the energy sector and Australia more broadly needs. Thank you for your time today and for your focus on this topic. Please watch this space. We will be releasing that report in the coming weeks. I'd like to take this opportunity now to hand over to Kurt to provide our policy update.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing some recent developments that are accelerating the electrification of the transport sector, which we know will add to significant skills and workforce pressures that are facing our sector. So some of this recent growth is due to government policy, but the latest spike is clearly the result of the global oil market being disrupted by the Iran conflict. So soaring petrol prices are clearly impacting consumer behaviour. So the Electric Vehicle Council has just recently reported that EVs have reached a record 22.9% of new car sales in March 2026. So that represents about a 70% growth year on year. March also saw the strongest ever sales for electric trucks, with some models that are now available are at a similar upfront cost as their diesel equivalents. So to give you a bit of background, the transport sector accounts for about 22% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions, but we have lagged behind many comparable international markets in both vehicle efficiency and electrification. And while various strategies to encourage EV adoption have existed at the state level, there was a limited national policy response before the current federal government came to office in 2022. So in the period between 2022 and the end of 2025, the proportion of EVs amongst new car sales rose from about 2 to 10%. And during this period, the federal government incentivised EV sales through the electric car discount and introduced the first national electric vehicle strategy and a new vehicle efficiency standard, which was the first of its kind in Australia. The federal government's 2025 net zero plan also included a sector plan for transport specifically. And that legacy has contributed to a slow and piecemeal rollout of the charging infrastructure that's required for mass EV adoption. But despite the slow policy response, governments around the country are now starting to pick up the pace. This month, we've seen the New South Wales government announce its latest EV strategy, and they backed that up with $100 million to expand fast charging networks in regional, remote and suburban black spots, as well as curbside charging infrastructure for drivers who can't charge at home, which is predominantly apartment dwellers. And it will also invest in training for around 2,000 mechanics in regional New South Wales, where access to courses is limited and travel distances are longer to safely service EVs and the associated charging infrastructure. So recent private sector announcements also suggest that the events in Iran are acting as a catalyst, and that's accelerating transport electrification faster than expected across both passenger vehicles and heavy vehicles and freight. So the EV industry has reinforced this message, releasing a joint statement last week, arguing that the current fuel crisis is a trigger for action, and that with the right policy settings, it stands ready to invest billions in charging infrastructure. And we're already starting to see some of that investment flow through, particularly in freight and public transport. Companies are investing at scale, with firms like Zenobē committing $100 million to support zero emissions freight, and manufacturers such as Volgren scaling up domestic production of zero emissions buses. The federal government's Investor Front Door program is also supporting enabling infrastructure, including the New Energy Transport's Wilton project in Sydney. And this will be the first in a proposed network of electric freight hubs between major cities. And that one's expected to begin operating in late 2026. So as the scale and pace of the EV infrastructure rollout accelerates, we know the demand for skilled and qualified energy workers will grow alongside it. And PSO has a role to play in supporting that transition, both in monitoring labour market trends and in developing training products to ensure that the workforce is equipped to install, test and commission this infrastructure. And this includes initiatives like our V2X accreditation program. So the fuel crisis may last many months or years. We don't know at this stage. It's all anyone's guess. But we may see that consumer behaviour that has been evident since March may mark the beginning of a longer-term trend. And we might also see a broader policy response to accelerate EV adoption on economic security grounds to reduce reliance on imported fossil fuels. So that's all for me today. Thank you for your time, and I'll hand back over.
Thank you everyone for joining us for our April Insights update. We'd like to extend our apologies for the glitch that happened as we were live during this presentation, but as you can see, we have managed to piece together the last remaining bits of our presentation. Due to the time anyway, we would have to skip our training product development section, but don't worry, Steve will be back next month to do a full review on that one. Thank you.